Welcome to Face2Face. This is a show about change and about what's next. It's a show that wants to ask questions, peel back the layers of our average everyday experience, and go beyond scratching the surface. We interview amazing people with incredible ideas and stories who have done wild, weird, and wonderful things. Remember that imagination shared create collaboration, and collaboration creates community, and community inspires social change. I'm David Peck, and this is Face2Face.
So my next interview was a real treat for me. It was with Garin Hovannisian and Serj Tankian, and talking about their new film, I Am Not Alone. This was a road movie to some degree. It's a documentary. It's about the triumph of the human spirit. It's about fighting back. It's about stepping in. It's about how, if you want to start a movement, you kind of need a dog as a companion to follow along, in your footsteps, and maybe to step into the future with you. And you're going to find out why this particular dog plays such an important role in the film. We talk about Armenia. We talk about politics and about movements and change. We get into hopelessness and pessimism and that contrast. We talk about idealism and something called the Velvet Revolution. And this is a film full of hope. This is a film, and especially in such a cynical age that we live in, it's something that you're going to want to see it. And it's the kind of film that you're going to walk out of the theater or watch it on whatever screen you choose to watch it on. You're going to go, wow, this is what it means to be human. This is what it means to step into the future in a way that's meaningful and relevant and full of intention, and also kind of have a good time while doing it. This is about politics and social change, and stay tuned for a very fun and interesting interview with Garin and Serj. And you might hear, unfortunately, a tiny little bit of radio interference. We were picking up some sort of Russian radio station on this day. We were 17th floor of the Intercontinental. I don't know what was going on. I hope it doesn't get in the way too much. But stay tuned. Coming right up, I Am Not Alone. Don't forget davidpecklive.com for more information about my speaking and my writing. You can find out more information there. You can pick up a copy of Real Change is Incremental. And don't forget face2facelive.ca, where we got quite a few interviews this year at the Toronto International Film Festival. A lot more coming up in the near future. You can advertise on the podcast itself. You can get involved by advertising in our newsletter. Sign up for our newsletter. Forward this to a friend. Please leave us a review. Take a few minutes, and we really would appreciate that review on iTunes. And if you want to actually support the work that I'm doing here, you can do that by becoming a Patreon subscriber as well. And if you can't do that financially, we totally get it. But a review on Spotify or iTunes or something along those lines would certainly be welcome. Don't forget rabble.ca for a whole host of other interviews with podcasters and bloggers and people that matter, and news for the rest of us. That's rabble.ca. And coming right up, Serj Tankian and Garin Hovannisian talking about their new film, I Am Not Alone. Well, welcome to Face2Face. We're joined by two very special guests here with us today to talk about their new film. I'm going to say premiering. It's premiering on some level here at the Toronto International Film Festival. I Am Not Alone. Serj Tankian and Garin Hovannisian are here to chat about the film and some of the issues it raises. Guys, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you so much. And we did have our world premiere last night here at Toronto.
It was world. I wasn't sure if it was international or world, and I wasn't quite. I mean, it's kind of, you're allowed to have more than one world premiere, aren't you?
Oh, I think it's one world premiere, but you can have a U.S. premiere and a European premiere, but we went straight for the world here in Toronto.
And I think it's a profoundly existential question, too, isn't it?
It is. I was thinking of multiple planets. Yeah, you got me going all over the place.
Yeah, I mean, what's the closest galaxy is, 24 trillion light years away or something like that?
You're an engineer, you would know.
Well, I don't actually. I just totally made that number up. So Garin, tell me about the film. It's a road movie, really, of a sort, isn't it? Is it 300,000 steps in by day 11 or something? It is a bit of a road movie, isn't it?
Hey, the road to democracy also. No, it's an interesting way of putting it. It is about one man and a small group of followers and a dog that, hit the road. They decide to walk 2 weeks across the country of Armenia. with a very simple but quite outlandish mission to bring down the most powerful government that country has ever known. And the road is quite fascinating.
Simple and outlandish is a perfect way to describe sort of what we watch unfold in the film. Because when I started, I mean, I kind of knew where we were going, Velvet Revolution and so on. I read the news, etc., but didn't really know the detail. And saw this one man, Nikol, starting out and not really knowing going in. I didn't read too much before I started the film, which I'm really glad about, and I'm going to recommend most viewers not read too much before seeing the film. But talk about a build towards democracy.
Definitely. I'm as you put it, when Nikol Pashinyan took that first step out of Gyumri and embarked on his 2-week expedition across the country to spread the word of the coming revolution, I don't think anybody believed that what he was saying was even remotely possible. And as he walked across the country with this small group of followers, he actually wrote a poem, which became a song. And the refrain of that song is what gives us the title of the film. Because as they walked, the revolutionaries sang again and again, "I am not alone, I am not alone, I am not alone." And of course, for a very long time, they were alone, or at least they appeared to be so. So this entire movie, in a sense, is about maybe even the magic power of these words, the power of that desperate people all across the world fighting within their communities, within their schools, within their countries, fighting for justice, and suffering from this feeling that, well, maybe this is all pointless. Maybe nobody cares. Maybe nobody's going to join us. And yet, maybe if you believe hard enough, and maybe if you insist on this theory that if only I walk, if only I believe, if only I truly accept that I am not alone, then people will join. And within a few weeks, he really wasn't alone. And the Armenian capital of Yerevan and the entire country had erupted with hundreds of thousands of people sweeping through the streets in chaotic and beautiful and peaceful acts of decentralized civil disobedience.
He's quite a polite political dissident too, which I thought was really interesting when he breaks into the television station. Serj, right? I mean, one of my there's so many sort of favorite moments for me, but one of my more favorite moments, and then apologizes after breaking in and kind of this little bit of a TV-like coup that occurs, and apologizes to the people that he's just sort of offended, and then goes on to speak to the nation.
Yeah, it's quite comical. And yes, he is very diplomatic. I mean, he's a journalist by trade, well-educated, and, been in the opposition as a member of parliament for many years. So, yeah, I mean, part of the ethos of this revolution was the peacefulness, the kind of also positive spirit. It shouldn't be a downer to participate in the progressive future of your own nation. It should be an upper. It should be fun. It was a cultural revolution as well. People were singing and dancing in the street. During the revolution. I mean, that's unheard of. It's a really great example, I think, of, as Garin explained, how positive change can occur in a divisive society that we have today.
Well, it could have gone so wrong. I mean, obviously there was violence. There were some people who died. There were some pretty tragic things along the way. I'd love to hear your thoughts too on the poverty and the corruption and so on. I mean, so many countries suffer from those types of things. Revolutions don't necessarily, well, history has shown they don't always end quite as well, in a sense, as this one did. Is that a fair statement, Garin?
Absolutely. Serj and I both have been involved in various social and political movements, predecessors of this movement in Armenia for more than 10 years now. All of them, in one way, had failed. These movements came, they tried to bring change. Some of them ended in violence, some of them ended simply by dissipating. But they always ended, and there was always a sense that any revolutionary process or social movement was condemned to fail. But that's not the way we look at it, because each movement helped inform the other. The techniques that were being learned from each so-called failed movement were actually making the next movement that much more powerful. And finally, with the most recent one, in March and April of 2018, the key was found. And the key was this unique kind of revolution, which was, we're not going to call the people to the single square and make them pitch tents and sleep there and suffer in the cold and, infuse them and warm them up with the responsibility of what good citizens. No. This is about fun. This is about taking ownership of your country. This is about decentralizing with your friends and shutting down roads and going on student strikes or worker strikes. Democracy is supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be energetic. It's supposed to be creative. It's supposed to be imaginative. And that's what appealed to Serj and me most of all, which was that this was really a creative revolution. It was really an artist's revolution.
You sound like a political science student. Do you have a little bit of that in your background, Garin? Or?
I have a journalistic background, but living in Armenia turns you into politics. When you live in a society when you're confronted endlessly with political and social issues, it becomes difficult to write. To sit in my apartment writing something when right outside my window there's another social movement taking shape. And so my sort of trying to be an artist in Armenia has always been hampered by the noise of the street, which forces me yet again to pick up my camera, go down the stairs, go outside and film, knowing full well that this is probably going to be a giant waste of my time and that nothing is going to come out of this. And I certainly have thousands of hours of footage in hard drives of failed movements and failed revolutions and movies that never found their third act. Here, finally, we had a movie that found its third act. And so although technically this movie took, just over a year to make, I would say it took more than 10 years.
Well, that's what's kind of interesting to me, and I'd love to hear either of you chat about it. So many questions, by the way. Oh, and I haven't congratulated you guys. It's a great film. It's a fun film. As you say, democracy should be fun. I'm always looking for a soundbite every day. I think I just found my soundbite for today. Democracy should be fun. But it really is. I've been talking about incremental change for years, that idea of, the water drop and the step. And this is controversial, right? From a social change perspective, do you need to turn things up and blow them up metaphorically and maybe literally sometimes? Or does change happen one step at a time?
In this case, as Garin said, it did happen one step at a time. You'll see the final result in this particular revolution, but it took many failed revolutions and many movements and many, violent actions and nonviolent actions for people to learn, both in terms of the people and the government, to learn what to do next, which is very interesting. However, I do feel like the decentralized civil disobedience portion of the film, what we call the magical key, can be something really inspiring for new generations and around the world that are looking for social progress, that are looking to change, more democratization out of their oppressive state in a way that's never been done before. We find that to be, we find this revolutionary to be, we find the revolution to be revolutionary in its techniques.
So is this going to become a model going forward? Is that what I'm hearing you're saying?
I think so.
Wow. All right. Revolutions in a box, but a really big box that has no lid.
The lesson will always need to be applied to the specific circumstance.
Context is everything, right?
For sure. Taking into account the political climate of the given country, the particular weakness of the rulers of that country, and the particular interests and the skill sets of the people to realize a revolution. But I do think, in general, this wearing out of the police by not giving them the great gift of consolidating in a very certain place and allowing them to control the situation. That was, to sort of apply what we're saying specifically, a lot of it was about wearing down the police, to be quite honest. Because when you force the police to decentralize, when it's about college kids who have a lot of energy to run from one intersection to the other, to the other, to the other, and soon enough, you have an entire police force that is exhausted and that has totally lost control of their country. That's what happened.
So, Serj, I think you mentioned earlier about the film being about hope, and with Garin, you've talked about democracy being fun and so on, and there really is this charming edge to the film, even though you're not quite sure, even if you've read the news, how this may turn out. And it doesn't always turn out as well for some, and others, are maybe kicked to the side along the way. But I want to ask you about the hopelessness and the pessimism, because that does come out in the film in a few of the interviews. And somebody says, my paraphrase here, but Armenians were convinced that they didn't have the power to change. And yet here we are. I am not alone. Step by step, we got a dog, we got one or two guys and a megaphone. Where's everybody else?
There was that pessimism. I remember going to Armenia in 2017 for the last parliamentary elections that were before the revolution, and there was a lot of vote buying and a lot of vote selling, and when the results came in, it was the predictable results. It was more consolidation of the previous regime, and it was quite depressing that no real change had occurred. Knowing that the people wanted that change, they were desperate for that change, for more economic stimuli, more justice in the courts, like all of the things that they deserve. So it was very depressing. I remember in 2017 leaving, going, man, I don't know, this is going to take another 20 years, or that kind of stuff. And within a year, bam, it was there. The timing was right. The people were ready. It was the right stimulus. It was the right time. It was the right emotive factor. And they stumbled upon the perfect technique. It was the perfect storm.
It's interesting, you talk about the timing and so on. I wanted to ask you about that. 10 years. This film is kind of 10 years in the making, but yet you started shooting, did I hear you right, about 2018? So not that long ago, but you're kind of referring more to the history and the backstory and the context and what's going on. And how do you get to that point? I mean, probably won't be a textbook case of revolutions necessarily. You can't take this and stick it into Mongolia, or not that Mongolia needs a revolution, but you know what I mean, into another context and expect the same results. And I wonder, Nikol talked about citizens knocking on citizens' doors, which I thought was just such a beautiful line. Was there something about that sense that changed the way this teased out? Does that make sense, Garin?
I'll try to unpack that, because I think there's something there. Nikol does say that the time had come, that he wanted to create a situation where it's not the police knocking on the citizen's door, but it's the citizens knocking on the doors of power. And I thought that was fascinating, because it really hones in and really defines this as a proactive revolution of again, it's not about standing, it's not about chanting, it's not about speeches. This wasn't about speeches, it was about action. People don't know what to do when they're just standing at a square and listening to the same speech again and again and again about the corruption, because there's nothing to do with that inspiration. You're being filled with all of this energy, but the energy has no direction. And finally, the energy had an outlet. You could do something with it.
It's like the dissidents let down. After the big rally, you go home, it's a lot of rah-rah. Now what do we do?
Now what are we going to do? And Nikol always insisted, he obviously believes in collective power, but in terms of the linguistic solution, it was always about the I. It was always about the individual. And it was not about pressuring others. He would repeat again and again, folks, I am taking my step. Will you take your step? This is what I'm doing. Today, I'm going to sit in front of this green bus, and I'm not going to let the bus move. What do you want to do?
It's a great scene, by the way. The bus, is it the bus driver that's yelling at him?
Yeah.
Which is so fantastic. Get out of my way. I gotta feed my family. Yeah. We're talking about a revolution here, and that's going on, and this guy's just concerned about it. It makes sense, right? Very practical.
The first half of the film is very comical, because you see these guys with great intentions, positive intentions, and every step of the way they are failing, these revolutionaries. Every program, every concept that they come up with, and then they stumble into this kind of accident because they're looking for a solution, like they're really pulling, And one thing we should mention that's really important is visualization. I think Nikol had a great way of telling the Armenian people that the current powers are not in power anymore. You are in power. They convinced, remember John Lennon, War is Over? during the Vietnam War. He convinced people that if you actually visualize something, it will come true. And he was really good at that. Like, he kept on repeating the phrase, saying that, you know, they think they're in power, but we're in power. They're not in power. Let's show them we're in power. Let's go block these streets here. Let's show them noon tomorrow. Every bus driver stop in the middle of the road at noon and honk for 3 minutes. The whole country was a cacophony of sound, a symphony of noise. It's just beautiful.
A cacophony of sound is pretty. Do you write poetry as well?
I do.
Oh, there we go. Okay, going to learn a little bit more about your other career. I think here we're starting to cross fertilize, no doubt. So does real change happen one step at a time? Is it really incremental? Is this a film for other people to say maybe this is a revolutionary film about revolutions?
Yes and no. Yes, because change does happen one step at a time. The authorities change, the people change. There's a natural evolution in the way the struggle plays out. But to be quite honest, living in Armenia and struggling, the people who've always who advocated evolution have always, to us, seemed to be copping out. Not all societies needed revolutionary change, but Armenia did. And the people who always use national security or 1,000 other excuses to say, why not one step at a time, didn't take into account that the kind of change that Armenia needed was actually fundamental. Because what was going on, actually, it was a fascinating sort of phenomenon that happens in many, it's sort of like the dictator's learning curve, which is the dictatorship is still there, the oligarchs are still extremely wealthy, and yet cosmetically, things seem to be looking pretty good. Because there's a new group of young, educated Republicans who are going to the West. They're getting degrees. They're coming back. They're putting on a polish in front of the whole enterprise. They have consultants, which their billions of dollars are able, the Western consultants, who can, tell them what ties to wear and how to present themselves democratically. From the outside, you may look at these people and say, oh, this is pretty good. These people are English-speaking, fluent. But we on the inside, who know what lies beneath, I think it's our responsibility to say, no, this is not okay. It's not okay to have cosmetic solutions to deep-rooted corruption, and Armenia is ripe for revolutionary change. So in this case, Armenia did need a revolution, and the people proved that.
The percentage, if I may continue that thought, the percentage of the population that actually stood up in Armenia in the end would be comparable to 35 million Americans hitting Washington, D.C. or all over the country and starting blocking roads and telling the president to basically resign. It's powerful. It's very powerful.
It really is, and that's an incredible stat and comparison. Was it a quiet revolution in a sense?
It was a sneaky revolution. It sneaked up. It sneaked up on the authorities, but it wasn't quiet. It was loud, because if you were walking on the streets of Yerevan in those few weeks in April of last year, you would have a piano recital at one corner. You would have a soccer or football game happening in another intersection. You would have, a trombone concert. It was a free-for-all, and culture and art were a very fundamental part of that. It wasn't that these concerts and these expressions of creativity were parts of the revolution. That was the revolution. That was the revolutionary activity. The revolutionary activity was for mothers to bring their babies with strollers and block intersections, or for these impromptu games or concerts to happen. That's what the revolution looked like.
Nikol says at one point, and maybe we can wrap up in the next couple of minutes. Sadly, I feel I've been doing this for a while now, and coming up on maybe 460 interviews over the past 6-7 years, and I'm pretty sure every interview ends too soon. And I feel the same way with you guys. Often I'll say, hopefully we can set up a part 2 maybe down the road, or maybe it's your next film, Garin. But Nikol, the quote, "There's a step we can take. Let's find that step." And I just thought that was a beautiful, it's not the end of the film, but it's a beautiful kind of, it could be the log line almost in a way, because my background's in philosophy academically, a bit of an existentialist in a sense. And the only way we can figure out who we are and that we aren't alone is by taking that step into the future. And I hope I'm not, connecting too many dots that aren't there. But I really see this film as deeply political and philosophical. It's about community. It's about relationships, and I mean, the dog just says it all, because it's so beautiful and simple, and yet it's rooted in this sense of community and home. I don't know. Am I going too far with this, Serj?
No, definitely. And mentioning the dog, it's kind of funny because when I was watching this live streaming from Los Angeles as the revolution was happening, and Nikol is in the square. He's got like 150, 200,000 people in front of him. He's talking really serious and whatever, and he sees the dog, and he just stops what he's doing, and he just goes, "Oh, Cello's here. Hey, everyone's here." And I'm like, this is the type of revolution that I want to be a part of. There's humanity to it. There's love. There's tenderness. And serious as hell as well, all those different elements really made this such a unique story that it had to be told, desperately had to be told.
It's interesting, maybe this could be the last question. Could this have happened without Nikol? Could someone else have pushed this type of movement forward? There's a certain commitment and passion and tenacity to sit down in front of a bus and to know on some intuitive level that that's the right thing to do. If the guy had hit the accelerator, everything would have changed.
I think everything just lined up. This couldn't have happened without Nikol. This couldn't have happened without Serj. This couldn't have happened without the women of Armenia who stood up and stepped up when the men were arrested. This couldn't have happened without the youth. It was the perfect collaboration of elements that made this happen. And this is how it happened, and I think that's what matters most.
Such a beautiful way to end the interview. It was a perfect collaboration. We've been talking here with my new friend Serj and Garin about their beautiful and challenging and important new film, I Am Not Alone. Thanks for your time today, guys.
Thank you.